Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Price. Welcome to this week's quarantine chat brought to you by me. I'm the author of I'm the author of How to Break Up with Your Phone and the creator of Screen Life Balance. And as you know, if you are on this call and have been on one before, I've started something called the Quarantine Challenge to try to help everyone stay positive and sane during this crazy time. So I wanted to start today by actually taking advantage of this chat function as we get started and ask if you would be willing to share your name, maybe where you're from, and what you're hoping to get out of this call, or any questions you might have just to get us started. I am here in the same totally professional backdrop that I've been in for the past few calls. There's definitely not a bath towel hanging here to make this a little bit less bleached out. I'm certainly not next to a bed, so don't even think this is unprofessional. But just making do. And as always, I'm surrounded by multiple notebooks. For example, this one, this one, this one, this one. So I'm going to use one of those to help. Are people having trouble typing? Oh, here we go. All right, here we go. Hi, Rebecca from Virginia. New to this, so just learning. Apparently, I am too. As I was saying, if anyone just joined the call, if you're up for it, just type in your name and where you're connecting from, and then what you're hoping to make or get out of this call. And you can use this chat throughout our time together. Feel free to ask questions throughout it, and then I will look at those towards the end. So hello, Barbara P. from Brooklyn. Hello, Helen from New Jersey. Hello, Richard or Rich. Yeah, thank you all for joining. I don't know if you guys can see all these things, so I'm just going to read them aloud to you. So I like to start each one of these calls by a little grounding exercise, which really is as much for me as it is for you. So thank you for the indulgence, which is basically to take a moment at the late afternoon if you're on the East Coast, early afternoon if you're on the West Coast, and somewhere in between if you're somewhere else in the US, to just be here in this moment and take a moment to ground yourself physically right here, right now, if I may quote Van Halen. And just recognize that for all the craziness happening in the world right now, you made it here to this webinar, and presumably in this particular moment, you are okay. And I like to bring that up at the beginning of each one of these. So just what I like to do is take a very deep breath and then try to just let go of whatever it is I'm holding on to and get a little bit less out of my brain and more into my physical body. So I'd invite you to do that with me right now as I sit on this extremely uncomfortable chair. Just have a moment, look at this chair. No one was really supposed to sit on chairs like this. They weren't. It's like breaking me and the chair to sit on it. So I'm gonna try to ground myself in it. So I want you to take a deep breath with me. I can't see any of you and you can't see each other, so don't be self-conscious. And take a deep breath and just on the exhale, just let go. So ready? And let your shoulders drop. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I want to talk to you about the quarantine challenge and what that actually means and how you can apply it to your life. And I want to address some of the things that people are bringing up to me in this chat box, which include staying sane, here to get a little bit of positivity, staying calm and rational, gain a sense of community, and get some tips on how to deal with this crazy time. That all sounds good to me. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing I wanted to do is just talk a bit more about what I mean by quarantine challenge. I sent a newsletter out about that today, which presumably you read if you are here on this call, but after I sent it, I realized I should have been a bit more specific about it, because I know I was talking about the quarantine challenge as staying positive, and I realized that was a bit misphrased, because what I really think the quarantine challenge is taking care of ourselves during this time and controlling what we can control. And if you see me looking down, it's because I have this little notebook with my notes in it. So in other words, I think it's important to recognize this, as someone reminded me, that sometimes the most positive thing we can do for ourselves is to allow ourselves to not feel positive. You know, it's great to look on the bright side, but it's also totally okay to not feel bright and happy right now. I don't think there's any reason to judge yourself on how you're feeling, or to try to judge your situation against others and say, oh, I shouldn't feel bad because I'm not a paramedic, or I shouldn't feel bad because I'm not suffering in the way that other people are suffering. That may be true, but you don't need to feel bad about it. We're all having our own individual experience, and there's no need to, what was it, like rank, distress in that way. So that would be the first thing. So quarantine challenge is taking care of yourself right now. And I want to talk a bit about why that's actually really important, because it might sound self-indulgent, kind of like why, there's so much stuff bad happening. Don't I have an obligation to check the news? Don't I have an obligation to worry about other people and worry about the situation all the time? And I want to say that, well, no, not really. I think we all have the obligation to do what we can during this crisis to help other people and also to help ourselves. And we should not deprioritize ourselves for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're going to drive ourselves crazy. I mean, if you're compulsively checking the news, which most people are right now, you're probably feeling pretty miserable much of the time and having trouble sleeping, having trouble enjoying anything, having trouble getting things done. I mean, you're probably overwhelmed to begin with the additional childcare duties or whatever responsibilities you're having or financial stress you're under. So don't feel obligated to feel bad. There's no obligation to feel bad. And there's actually a reason to proactively try to take care of yourself that actually is physiological and scientific, which is basically that when we're stressed out, it actually has a negative impact on our immunity. It has negative health outcomes. The more stressed you are, the more your body is going to release this hormone called cortisol, which you may have heard me talk about before, but basically cortisol is a very important stress hormone that helps us respond to and deal with physical threats, like actually being attacked by somebody. It's extremely useful if you're trying to run away, but it's not very useful for an emotional stress such as we're experiencing right now. And over time, elevated cortisol is well established to increase our health risks of all sorts of negative things like heart attack and stroke and type 2 diabetes and obesity, et cetera, et cetera. But more relevant for this moment, it actually will reduce your immunity. And what's more, it'll probably get in the way of your sleep. And sleep is one of the number one things you can do to boost your immunity. So far from being indulgent, taking care of yourself in this moment is very important for the common good. It's going to enable you to have more resources available emotionally to take care of the people in your life. And it's also actually going to make it less likely that you get sick. And if that happens, if you are able to prevent that, you're actually giving a gift to society because you're preserving resources for people who need them the most. So I think it's important to recognize that you actually are doing something really important if you're trying to make yourself feel nourished and calm during this time, not trivial at all. So a bit about my process about how I came to create this quarantine challenge to begin with. And just as a backstory, as you guys probably know, I'm a writer, I'm a science journalist, and one thing I've been doing with my, I guess, nervous energy is trying to write stuff for public audiences. So I've been working on a piece actually just today about this idea of a quarantine challenge that hopefully will come out soon. And it starts with this experience I had a couple weeks ago when this all started to truly get crazy. And the first, social distancing guidelines were in place. When I went for a walk with my husband and we're talking about coronavirus, and then, I was looking down and we're just talking about all these stressful things. And then at some point I looked up and I just saw this magnolia tree and it was totally in bloom. It was absolutely gorgeous. Like its branches were dripping with blossoms. And I thought, that is so beautiful. And at the same time, I thought, what right does that magnolia have to be so beautiful? Doesn't it know there's a crisis going on? And without really even recognizing what I was doing, I realized I'd taken a blossom off the ground and I put it in my pocket. And what I recognized is that without me even realizing it, the entire world had erupted into spring at that point. There were so many beautiful things, and looking at those beautiful things made me feel calmer and made me for a second forget about all the other bad stuff that was happening. And it inspired me to do what I could to actually change my own focus away from anxiety and towards things that made me feel better. Because I realized, what is the point, right? Like, I'm already washing my hands, I'm already socially distancing myself, I'm trying to protect myself and others, I'm trying not to touch my face. What's the point of just further stressing myself out? So I realized maybe this is an opportunity for me to try to consciously shift my focus and change my habits so that instead of dealing with my anxiety by checking and rechecking the news, I could deal with my anxiety by doing things like looking at magnolia trees or looking out the window at the sky or having a group Zoom call with a bunch of strangers on the internet who are making me feel like I'm less alone. So I thought it would be useful to share some of the tactics that I've learned in the course of my own writing and research for how you change a habit that you can use in your own life. And a lot of these I adapted from this book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. So I remember on last call, someone was asking me for recommendations of books to read during this time, and that's a great one, The Power of Habit. But basically, one of the most important things you can do while you're trying to take care of yourself and change your habit is just to notice what you're engaging in the moment when you are, or notice your emotions when you're engaging in a habit and see what you feel like so you can choose to do something else if it's not positive. So for example, if you are looking at the news or listening to the radio and you're noticing that it's triggering your anxiety, well, that's great because you've just given yourself a chance to choose to do something else. And over time, if you get good at noticing your own emotional response to some of the activities that you do, the recognition of your anxiety itself can be the trigger for the new habit. So one important thing to recognize is it's extremely hard to break a habit because you have a circuitry in your brain that's been activated and basically it will become out of your control, but it is possible to change a habit. And one of the most effective ways to do that is substitute one habit for another habit. So substitute, which direction would this go? Substitute in a habit you're trying to establish as a replacement for one you're trying to change. That of course requires you to know what your brain is actually after when you engage in the habit to begin with. So in other words, what reward are you after? And reward should have quotes on it because it doesn't mean like you're getting money or something. It's basically like, what's your brain hoping to achieve when it engages in this habit? When you check news because this is ironic what actually happens, but you might to check the news to find some information that's actually going to make you feel better. Of course, you're not finding that information, so it's stressing you out. Once you understand what your brain is after, you can ask yourself, well, what's another way to achieve the same result? What's something else I could do that actually would give me what I'm after? So perhaps if you're stressed and anxious and you're trying to soothe yourself by turning to the news, once you recognize that you're after your self-soothing, you can say, the news is certainly not doing it, but I tend to feel more relaxed if I've taken a walk. I tend to feel more relaxed if I spend a little time reading, meditating, praying, doing a craft. I don't know what your particular, taking a bath, like taking a shower, really calling a friend, really anything like that. So I encourage you, when you notice that your anxiety is spiking, to pay attention to what it is you're doing and ask yourself what you're actually trying to achieve with it, whether that's successful, and if it's not successful, what else you could do. And if you practice this over time, you'll get better at this self-monitoring, and you'll actually be able to very quickly register when something's not helping you, and you'll also have alternatives at the ready. Which leads me to my other point, is that you want to make this as easy as possible for yourself. Part of the reason we engage in habits that we know are bad for ourselves is because they're so accessible. So if you know you want to stop checking Facebook all the time, but you have your phone in your pocket, it's going to be really hard. Psychiatrists call this ease of access. You don't want to have the source of your anxiety be very, very easy. So instead, you want to get the habit or get some kind of trigger or props or whatever for the habit you're trying to engage in to be very accessible. So in other words, distance yourself, whether physically or emotionally, from the stuff you're trying to change or spend less time on, and then make it really easy to be reminded of your other ideas and to engage in those activities. So for example, one I always like to recommend is get your phone out of your bedroom. Don't charge your phone in the bedroom. Turn off notifications for the news. And instead, on your bedside table, put, I don't know, any one of your 17 notebooks, depending on who you are. They could be purple. I don't know. You could pick another color. On your bedside table instead, so that when you go instinctively to reach for your phone or your tablet or whatever it may be, you'll instead encounter a trigger for the habit you're trying to establish. And I also really want to encourage you to think about the way that you are engaging with people when you are seeking connection, because in many cases, I think we're all desperate for human connection right now, which makes total sense. And as a side note, feeling socially disconnected and lonely also negatively impacts our immunity. So it's very important to recognize that as well. So that's mostly as I wanted to say about habit changing. Let me see. Sorry, I didn't finish my own point. What I was trying to say is that if you notice that you're actually after human connection, and for example, you're seeking it out by engaging in a group text, I don't know how many of you guys are just spending like so much time thumb typing. you might ask yourself, is that actually the best way to achieve that connection? Because I personally have found that just calling people on the phone so much better. And it's been actually kind of nice how the current situation is breaking down some of those social hesitations and boundaries that we have built up around just calling someone, just like calling a friend. And if they're free, they'll pick up. And if they're not, they won't. Instead of like texting and then setting a time and having all these dates. So anyway, basically what I'm doing in my own life is I'm trying to pursue as much as possible that makes me feel calm, nourished, or comforted, connected, and in control. And again, I really want to reiterate, this is not self-indulgent. This actually will make you stronger, both emotionally and physically, and more capable of dealing with everything else going on right now. So let's see. Yeah, I think that's basically what I have. I see there's some questions here, which I'm realizing that having the chat open totally distracts me if someone writes, which is not your fault, but it means that I'm stumbling over my own thing. So let's see. I've got Leanne from Manager. Oh, okay. Jake says, is all this in the Power of Habit book? Also, I have 5 Northwestern purple notebooks that I stole from my little brother. Nice. I highly endorse notebooks of all kinds, as you can tell. A lot of this is in the Power of Habit book. It's also in my book in a different form, How to Break Up with Your Phone. I love The Power of Habit. I think it's a great read because it has a lot of really interesting case studies about habit change and a lot about what goes on in our minds, or brains rather, in the course of creating habits. So if you want to dork out a bit about habits, I would highly recommend it. And it's also written very engagingly. So it's definitely a good one. If you just want a summary of it, particularly when it comes to devices, there's a lot of that in How to Break Up with Your Phone. But hey, if you got time on your hands, I would read The Power of Habit as well. Let's see. Thoughts on that versus Atomic Habits? I don't know what that is. Jake, can you tell me what an atomic habit is? And then I'll try to answer that question. Let's see. We've got, hey, Leanne, I wasn't able to get, let's see, question from Leanne. I have an observation I've noticed with myself. Before everything shut down, I already had many tasks on my plate and have somehow managed to take on even more tasks than before the quarantine. To me, this is an anxiety habit similar to the kind that makes you check your phone compulsively rather than just sitting with your thoughts. Except instead of checking my phone, I'm compulsively taking on commitments during this unusual time. I clearly have a hard time doing nothing and was wondering if anyone had tips on how to break up your day and avoid activities that never seem to end. I am smiling, Leanne, because it's as if I wrote that. You're just channeling my brain. I didn't write that. That's really someone named Leanne. Yes, I think I certainly recognize the impulse to manage anxiety with busyness. And I think that there is definitely a, it's, hey, if you're going to cope in some way better than that, then like take up a drinking habit or something if you didn't have one. But I also think that there's a healthy line and that it's way too easy to cross that line. And I definitely do that myself. I've been working like crazy for the past couple of weeks, and I've actually been trying, along with my assistant Jen, we've been trying to figure out ways to take more breaks and to slow down. So I think, first of all, recognizing that that's what you're doing is really important, going back to that idea of cultivating awareness of your own actions and how they're making you feel. And I would say that probably, if you're like me, some degree of busyness is actually quite helpful, if not essential, in keeping you sane. Because like, what else are we going to do with our crazy minds but just read the news, But there's a point at which it becomes too much. It's the same as like binge eating of food, where maybe eating a bit of that cake makes you feel good, and then too much and you feel gross. For me, I have a physical reminder because my butt starts to hurt from this horrible, horrible chair. I don't always listen to that. So I think, again, recognizing what's going on is your first step. I think also taking some time each morning before you turn on your computer, before you turn on your screens, and actually trying to identify what you want to be doing with your day can be very useful, and trying to identify what would make you feel satisfied at the end of the day. So kind of looking forward so that you can figure out how much is enough. I'm definitely speaking to myself here. How much is enough? Do I have to write 2 articles in one day? Really? Is that helping anybody? and what will make me feel satisfied when I go to sleep. And in my case, I don't have that many categories of goals right now. It's spending time with my family. It's trying to work on this green life balance and the quarantine challenge and reach out to all of you guys and build this into something that will nourish and support all of us. It's getting exercise and trying to play music. And I'm amazed by how many days I get to the end of the day and I'm like, what happened? It's not like I'm going anywhere, you know? But anyway, I think setting your goals ahead of time. I mentioned this on last week's call, but just to pull out one of my planners, this is this goal crazy planner that allows you to actually do that. So it has like a space for your impactful goals, things you want to accomplish during the day, like an end of day check-in. And this is what I used as a model and inspiration for the sanity saving journal prompts that are in the newsletters from Screen Life Balance. So anyway, kind of a long-winded thing, but I think that the first step is recognizing that you're using business as a way to cope, and then maybe trying to experiment with slowing down. And I think the difficulty in any habit change is when you try to go cold turkey and just change all sorts of things at once and think that it's permanent. And so I want to also encourage you, it doesn't have to be permanent. You could just say, hey, listen, this afternoon, I'm just going to see what it would be like to turn off my computer and go for like a half-hour walk and start small and just see how it goes. Because when you have a positive feeling from it, you're more likely to want to pursue that feeling, and the habit will grow naturally just because you want it to. Let's see. We did not get Zoom bombed. No, we didn't. But I was kind of hoping that I would be able to just, you know, vent some of my frustrations at the world by having someone obnoxious come in and then be like, really? This is what you do with your time? As a side note, I have a daughter who I don't on social media or anything, but for the sake of this small call, I will say there's a class snake, and her preschool teachers just sent out a link to live snake feedings every Friday and on Zoom. So the snake has its own Zoom like channel. And I just was laughing to myself thinking, what if someone tried to Zoom bomb that particular call, you know, just like typed in the meeting ID and who knows where we'll show up. And instead of having something like this, it's actually a corn snake in the middle of eating a mouse. And it would be like, who's bombing whom? All right. Here's another question. This is from Tolu. I often struggle to use the word positive because it's often attached to the mandate of being happy or resorting to bumper sticker statements. Do you have any more suggestions for reframing positivity to make it more meaningful? Yes, again, I think that is so important. And I think that if I were to be able to revise this morning's newsletter, I would definitely, maybe I'll do that in one later this week, is talk about the difference between positivity and trying to force yourself to be happy. And I really don't think that there's a benefit in trying to force yourself to be happy if you need to feel differently, if you are feeling differently. So to me, there's kind of a subtle difference between forcing yourself to be happy and consciously deciding that when possible, you'll shift your mindset. So in other words, I don't know, I read about this in a newsletter, but I had an experience years ago when I moved across the country to go to journalism school, and I was like really having a hard time, and I was feeling miserable. And I was compounding that because I was trying to make myself feel better by basically being like, why are you miserable? Like, you are in California, it's a sunny day. Look at these people in the park playing Frisbee, just get it together and stop feeling miserable. And it was really helpful one day as I was sitting on a curb, like basically crying, to recognize actually there's a reason I feel upset. You know, in that case, I'd moved across the country away from everyone I knew, and I'd accidentally showed up 2 weeks early. I don't know how I did that, but there was nothing to do. And once I just gave myself permission to feel the way I felt, it removed this layer of self-criticism that really had been making me feel even worse. So going to talk, I mean, in terms of what you're saying, I think, yeah, be kind to yourself and recognizing that you probably aren't feeling positive all the time. But at the same time, recognize we do engage in behaviors each day that affect our emotional state. So if you do have the choice between, for example, keeping the news on in the background or checking your work email for the 200th time the day, whatever that is, if you have the choice of doing that, or choosing an activity you've pre-identified as something that is more likely to relax or nourish you, then maybe choose that. So I don't know if that makes sense, but in other words, you're not trying to fight against your own emotions, but when you do have a choice of choosing two activities that have different emotional outcomes, I'm suggesting that we all try to relieve ourselves of this obligation that we have to feel bad all the time, or we have to keep up with the news just because, and instead try to reorient ourselves towards just the default being, if I've got the choice of two things, I'm going to choose the one that makes me feel better. Does that help? So hard on these web chats where like, does that help? And then you have to type, it did, no, it did. Anyway, I will wait on that. Oh, yes, it helps a lot. Oh, good. Yay. And we didn't get Zoom bombed. Jake, I don't see any. Did you define Atomic Habit? This is going to bother me. I see you sent, I've got a PDF. I'm sure whatever that book is, I've probably also looked at, Jake, because I am also a nerd. So we're kindred spirits here. But yes, if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to try to field them. I also would love it if you guys would share any feedback you have or resources or things that are helping you cope, whether in this chat or just in general, to write them to me and my assistant, Jen. And you can reach us through the contact form at screenlifebalance.com, or you can also just reply directly to any of our newsletters and it'll come straight through. We have a recommendation from Billy who says, has anyone watched John Krasinski's Some Good News? Definitely an antidote to the news craziness. Highly recommend. I have not, but I like him. I would like to check that out. Yeah, we got an oh my God, yes to that. Anyway, some other things that I've been doing just as resources to share with you. I may have mentioned this previously. I've got a friend who started these online virtual dance classes that are live. And you can do them from your living room, suggested donation of like $8 to $12. This week is Irish step dancing, so you can check that out at virtualdanceusa.com. And I've got a friend who's doing these great live story times for kids. If anyone has kids and wants like an interactive thing to do with their screens, that's Liz Filios, and Filios. And I've sent out a link in previous newsletters, can do that again. And then MrJohnsMusic.com has some great content of, again, interactive music shows for kids. But anyway, the last things I wanted to say before I wrap up is to thank you for being here, to again encourage you to send us your feedback, suggestions, recommendations, and also requests for future webinars to this. Also send us any feedback you have on particular things you're struggling with when it comes to technology. So for example, if you're having trouble with social media or with email or the news or sleeping, because Jen and I are in the process of building out some actual full courses, which we've been meaning to launch for a while, but now finally have the opportunity to really focus in more depth on. We have one more recommendation to turn off notifications on the phone, which is true, other than text or calls. This is a great suggestion that I definitely recommend, minimize those notifications. And anyway, the last thing I would say officially on this webinar is if you feel inspired, Jen and I are offering all this stuff for free, but if you have the means and are interested, we also do have a Patreon account. It's Patreon, patreon.com/screenlifebalance. And it's in all the emails. And basically it's like a pay-as-you-can membership model that would support the work that we're doing right now. And if you can't afford that, totally fine, or just don't want to, also totally fine. I'd love your help spreading the word about the quarantine challenge and getting friends and family to sign up. And I guess that's the last point I would make, is that accountability is that it is actually really helpful in a sense of community. So I personally love the idea of there being mini quarantine challenge groups around the country where you can just gather your friends and talk about what this might mean to you. I think that'd be really cool, because in my mind really is about taking care of yourself, but that might mean different things to different people. It could be just surviving, right? It could be just doing the things that you already know that you can do to nourish yourself and take care of yourself. But you may be in a position also where maybe you do have a bit of more time on your hands right now. Not everybody does, obviously, but some people maybe who had really big commutes or something like that, you might actually have, or even the time you're spending on the news, you might actually want to make a challenge for yourself to do something proactive, like, you know, I don't know, try an online class or practice a hobby that you already have. You can define it as for yourself. But anyway, I encourage you to take this idea where you will. And again, I thank you so much for joining me on this quarantine chat. I look forward to seeing you all in the future, and I really hope to hear from you. So thank you. Take care, everybody.